Scripture this evening is 1 Thessalonians 1, 8 through 10. For the word of the Lord has sounded forth from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but also in every place your faith toward God has gone forth, so that we have no need to say anything. For they themselves report about us what kind of reception we had with you, and how you turned God from idols to serve a living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, that is Jesus, who rescues us from the wrath to come.
In Exodus chapter 20, we have God there speaking to the Israelites and giving them what we know to be the Ten Commandments. In verses 3 through 6, he says, "You shall serve no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." Now God says, I'm a jealous God. And that is repeated by the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 2, where he says, "For I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy." There is an aspect to God that we must always understand. We must always know that God will not share your life with something else. He will not take the second seat to anything else. He is God, and therefore He is worthy to be in the preeminent place of our life at all times. You know, in the text that was just read a moment ago to the Thessalonians, Paul said that you turn to God from idols to the living God. You know, going all the way back into Jesus' ministry, as Jesus is sitting there at Caesarea Philippi and looking at all the idols that were embedded into that cliff face there. And he asked Peter, or he asked the disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And they told him all different types of people. He says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," clearly making a contrast between the God of heaven and the dead gods of stone that were embedded in that hillside in front of them. In the past, mankind's willingness to engage in many forms of idolatry plagued mankind and took mankind away from God. In the city of Athens, when Paul walked into it in the first century, it is said that there were 30,000 temples to pagan gods in that city alone. Man had given themselves so much to paganism. We go back into the Old Testament and we look at the nation of Israel. Both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judea both fell because of the idolatry that existed within them. No king in the northern kingdom was ever right. No king in the northern kingdom ever opposed the idolatry that existed there. And there was really only one king. While there were good kings in the southern kingdom, there was really only one king that aggressively attacked the pagan aspects of what was going on in Judah, and that was the king Josiah, just 20 years before God would destroy the nation. He was the only king that we see destroy the high places and to go and destroy the calf at Bethel, where Jeroboam had led the northern kingdom astray in idolatry. So we see Josiah doing that. Other kings, it says that they walked in, as David walked, they walked before God, yet, it would say, the high places remains. And the high places were places of pagan worship. And so they didn't really finish the job. So we see idolatry as something that has hurt man throughout the ages. And I think many think that idolatry is relegated to our unenlightened ancestors in the Bible. And in reality, the same idols worshipped by our ancestors are still the same ones worshipped by men today. Because idols are not about stone, they're not about wood or whatever they might be made out of. Idols are about a mindset. If you have a small g God that is created by a man, I guarantee you that small g God is reflecting the mindset of that man, what he wants, what he desires, and it's going to be reflected in that idol. So idols are still here. And they're really still the same because the same desires and the same evils of heart exist within man today that existed at that time. I want us to consider some ancient idols that are worshipped still today by modern man. We look back to the Old Testament and we see the idol Molech. Molech was the god of the Ammonites. In 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 7, God calls Molech a detestable god or detestable idol. Solomon built a place for Molech to be worshipped at Jerusalem. Solomon built it in the valley of Hinnom. And it is there that they did what you did in worship to Molech. You offered your children into the fire. You would throw them into a fire and sacrifice your children. And that took place right there in the shadow of the city of Jerusalem in the valley of Hinnom. We know that King Ahaz and King Manasseh both offered their sons to Molech there in that valley. And the valley became so defiled that over time, because of how the defilement of this worship to Molech, the valley would become nothing more than the garbage dump of the city of Jerusalem. And in the New Testament, we see Jesus there use the word Gehenna, which is the name for the valley of Hinnom, as the word for hell. That it was that unclean, that it became the very image in Jesus' ministry of eternal punishment and of that which was unclean. Molech is still worshipped. He's worshipped in a much more sanitized, yet I guess equally destructive way today. We see Molech worshipped today in abortion. We think, how can people sacrifice their children? And folks, it happens day in and day out in our nation. This is not going to be a sermon on abortion, so I'm not going to go into the depths of that. That is certainly another lesson for another time. But the Bible is not ambiguous on abortion. And the Bible can clearly condemn abortion in every way. But abortion today is still that same mindset. Sacrificing children. Women sacrifice children today in our nation for choice. You know, in all of this stuff that has gone on in the last year, you see women on TV saying, I'm getting an abortion just to show I can. I have a choice. Or maybe it's women's power as they see it. I'm going to show you what I can do. So I'll sacrifice a child to show how strong I am. Maybe it's just for politics, and maybe it's to try to avoid the consequences of immoral living. Whatever it is the same sacrifice. The sacrifice of a child to this life, to things and desires of this life. And it is just as much murder now as it was in the valley of Hinnom in the Old Testament. But that's the physical side of this. I want us to think of the other side of this. I want us to think about it from a spiritual perspective, because I think that has a lot more to do with us today here in the church. And that is, we can worship at the altar of Molech if we do not raise our children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. It's not a physical death, but we certainly can contribute to spiritual death if we fail in that great responsibility to make certain that our children know God That's exactly what Paul tells us to do in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, to raise them in the understanding and the teachings of God. Instead of teaching them, though, to not be like this world, too often we see, even in the church, an encouragement for participation in activities that lead to sinful desires. Oh, well, that's just that's something everybody should get to do. Maybe it's something people shouldn't do to begin with. And yet we see parents letting their children do those things that lead them to a sinful life. Many do not give nearly the attention to knowing the Bible as much as they do their children knowing their schoolwork. And it doesn't matter how smart our children are, if they don't make it to heaven, folks, we fail. It doesn't matter what kind of names and degrees they have. Heaven is really the only goal for our children. God has entrusted us with them, and He expects us to return them to Him as well. We are sometimes more, when we look at what's going on in the world today, I have found over the past 15 years that secular activities have become non-negotiable. They have to do those things. But church activities have become optional. And all we've done is teach our children that when they leave home and they go out there and they're making a choice between a secular activity and church activities, that church is optional, and pretty soon church will be optional pretty much every single time the doors are open. I've worked on a college campus. I've seen it. That's exactly the mindset that happens. And that's because we taught them that those things are more important than here. Maybe not in words like that. We don't say that. But in the actions and what we allow, we demonstrate it. When I was in high school, I was in band, and we always practiced on Thursday night. There was some reason we couldn't practice on Thursday night. And so the band director said, we're going to practice on Wednesday night. And I went up to him and I told him, I said, I can't come on Wednesday night. My parents won't let me come on Wednesday night. He said, then I will dock your grade. And so I told my dad. And my dad went up there and made it in no uncertain terms that I wasn't coming. And that if my grade was messed with, he would be going to the school board. And suddenly it was okay to not go on Wednesday night. Now my dad could have said, no, Nathan, just go on. It's just church. And he would have put in my mind that there's an option between Christ and the world. When I was living in North Carolina, one of the best catchers in the girls' softball league in a 2 million person metroplex. Now, this was an enormous softball league across the entire Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill metroplex. One of the best was the daughter of our church secretary. And she told every coach that her daughter, and every coach wanted her daughter, she said, my children do not miss church. That if it's on Sunday morning or it's on Sunday night, she won't be there. She'll be there for any other game. And I watched Jansen come into church on Sunday nights, dirty and in her uniform. She'd come in, she'd go to church, she'd leave and go back to the ball field. But she never missed church. And Mom and Dad said, that's the way it's going to be. That's negotiable. This isn't. Parents need to make those stands, and these things would begin to wane. There is nothing more important for our children than to teach them the importance of the Lord's church. If we don't do that, it will come back to haunt us. And we will have played a part, possibly, in the spiritual deaths of many young people. We also see that they worship the goddess Aphrodite. So, in fact, Epaphroditus of the New Testament that Paul talks about in the church, to the church at Philippi and Philippians, his name is actually named after that particular goddess. But Aphrodite was the great goddess of love. And in her temple at Corinth, there were 1,000 prostitutes for the worship of Aphrodite through sexual immorality. You know, most every idol that you have, if you look into the the idolatry of the ancient times, pretty much every single idol had an aspect of sexual immorality that was tied to it. You know why? Because they were created by men, and that's what men wanted. And so it was put into it. But Aphrodite and ones like Artemis and Diana, they took it to a whole other level. Sexual immorality remains a goddess or a god of many today. And even in Peter's time, he said in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 14, having eyes full of adultery that never cease from sin. We have entire groups of people in this nation today that their whole identity, the whole identity that they promote, the whole identity that they want to be recognized by, their whole identity is based in some sexual perversion that they are committing. They want to be identified by it. And somehow we look at that and we just kind of glance over it because it's so prevalent. And yet it's so abhorrent. And they take God's great sign of the rainbow, God's sign, and they steal it and try to use it for their own purposes. That's still God's rainbow. It's not theirs. And what they do is nothing to be proud of in any shape, fashion, or form. And they seek to lead our children into the same miserable lives of sin that they live in. And God forbid. And He does. And may we also. Premarital sex seems to even be accepted as the norm by some in the church today. It must always be taught as unacceptable. It is immoral. It is sin, and it brings a terrible consequence to young people's lives. It brings a consequence of mindset to marriage later. It must always be unacceptable. We need to teach our children this truth. We need to understand that as a part of that, we need to stop acting as if the way our children dress has zero impact on this subject. If you're pretending that that's the case, you've got your eyes shut and your head in the sand. Because the way our children dress has an enormous impact in this area. Those priestesses at the goddess of Aphrodite dressed in ways that attracted men. And yeah, somebody says, well, Nathan, that's a man's problem. Well, no, it's both. I'm to dress in a manner, you're to dress in a manner, male or female, in a manner that is honorable to God. Not something that can be used as the devil's tool to lead people into immorality, into thoughts that are unacceptable to God. We're to be doing that. We're to be living in that manner. And the fact that it has an impact on the morality of our children, there is a Mount Everest of evidence that says it does. Some years back, a cruise liner was hijacked by terrorists. You know what? People can act like they don't see it, but the world sees it. They understand this. They don't deny it. I found that really it's only people that proclaim to be Christians that try to deny this reality. And all the women stopped wearing their halter tops and their swimsuits and their short shorts, and they put on pants and long shirts. Why? Because they didn't want to sexually attract the men that took over the ship. See, they understand that that's exactly what it does. You go to a prison and they'll have a sign up there that says, you can't wear these things, short shorts, halter tops, things like that. Why? Because it attracts and causes the wrong kind of mentalities. The world understands it. The world accepts it. They don't care. We need to get our heads out of the sand and understand it too. Because that's why so many of our children are going off in that direction. Because we have let them live and dress and act in ways that lead to it. Aphrodite is still being worshipped in actions of people today, and we need to be aware of that. And I think in our country today, as you look around, you've got to see it. Then we have Hermes. This one's a little bit different. In Acts chapter 14, we see Paul and Barnabas there, and the people actually think they're gods. They think that Barnabas is Zeus, and they think Paul is Hermes, and they're literally bringing cattle in to offer sacrifices to these two men, and Paul and Barnabas are doing everything they can to stop them from doing this. And I think when we think about that, we see that it's still the same today. It was still the same in their time, that sometimes we tend to get fixated on people instead of God. At the church at Corinth, we see that they had become fixated on who baptized them. I am of Paul, I am of Cephas, I am of Apollos, right? And they elevated the messenger above the one who gave the message. So they became a god in the minds of those people. And we need to be careful of that we don't follow men. I promise you, if you follow a preacher, any preacher, you'll be disappointed. We're not called to follow preachers. I don't want you following me. I want you following God. Following Jesus Christ and Him only. Because following men only leads to spiritual doom. Too many messengers arrogantly want to be the center of attention. And they want to make themselves this very idol, the messenger god Hermes. They want everybody to see them, pay attention to them, idolize them. And folks, the proclamation of the gospel is not about me, it's not about you, it's about our Lord. And it must always be that. We sacrifice self to serve Him. Romans chapter 3 and verse 4, Paul says, "Let God be true, though every man a liar." And let me tell you, God is always number one. If God says it one way and man says it another, folks, God is true and that man's a liar. It's the way it will always be till the end of time. Our purpose is not about men, it is about God. You know, people worship today. It amazes me as I look at things going on in our society, the people that a lot of people listen to. You know, you look at how many have followers and things like that, and they're just hanging on every single word that they say. And these people that have, influencers, whatever it may be out there, and they have all these tens of thousands of people that are just waiting for them to say something, and most of what they say is just ignorance. And we have what God in heaven has spoken. And it's so hard to get an open ear, or an open eye, or open heart. But we are called to proclaim it. Idolatry is not something that can be relegated to our unenlightened past. It'd be nice if it was. But it's still very much alive and well today. We have dressed our idols up and tried to hide them from plain sight, but they still control the hearts. They still control the minds of men against God. They are more sophisticated. They have different names, but they're still the same. And they're still leading men to immoral and godless lives. What God this evening are you serving? You know, Joshua in Joshua 24, they entered into the land and had taken the land, and Joshua was about to die. He said, you got a choice in his last address to the people. You have a choice. You can serve the gods of this land, all those small g idols. You can serve them, or you can serve the God that delivered you from Egypt. The God who you saw do powerful signs in the wilderness. You can serve them or you can serve Him. He gave them that choice that day. But as He gave them the choice, He also gave them His answer, didn't He? He says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I hope that's your motto. I hope that is your drive today. As for me and my house, no matter what, we serve the Lord. If it's not, I hope that you make the change today. If you have not come to Jesus Christ and given your life to Him to serve Him as one of His, I hope that you make that decision to come and obey the gospel of Jesus Christ, to know the life that can be found only in Him and the eternal life that's only found through Him. If we can help you on that journey, the journey away, as the Thessalonians were told, the journey of turning away from the idols of this world and turning to the living God, we want to help you this evening. Won't you come as we stand, as we sing?